What did Rob Reiner whisper to Mel Brooks 90 minutes before a knife ended his life? Why was Billy Crystal standing in a Brentwood driveway covered in his best friend's daughter's tears before most of the detectives had even arrived? And why does Michael Douglas keep saying he warned Rob this exact thing would happen and Rob refused to listen? They have won Oscars, created legends, made generations laugh and cry. And for 2 weeks after Rob Reiner's murder, they said nothing. Not a word. Not a statement, not even a carefully worded press release from a publicist. Just silence. Until December 26, 2025, when each of them separately opened their doors to journalists they have trusted for decades and spoke truths that will haunt Hollywood for years to come. Part 1. At 99, Mel Brooks finally reveals the last words Rob Reiner ever said to him. When you sit across from Mel Brooks, you are sitting across from a monument. You are looking at a man who has survived nearly an entire century, who watched friends die in World War II, who buried a wife he adored, who created comedy that will outlive all of us. At 99 years old, Mel Brooks should be the keeper of joy, the guardian of laughter, the man who proved you could make people smile even about the darkest things. But on December 26th, when he invited me into the same living room where he used to sit with Carl Reiner watching game shows and eating Chinese food, there was no sparkle in his eyes. There was no setup for a punchline. There was only exhaustion and fury and a grief so heavy it seemed to physically weigh down his shoulders. The world has spent 2 weeks dissecting Rob Reiner's murder in headlines and cable news segments and true crime podcasts. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a theory. But Mel Brooks has facts. He has memories. He has the last phone conversation Rob Reiner ever had with anyone outside that house. And what Mel revealed on December 26th changes the entire story we think we know. Mel started talking without me even asking a question. He sat down in a worn leather chair, looked at a photograph on the side table showing him with Carl and a young Rob from the 1960s, and said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "I knew Rob was going to die. I knew it 6 months ago. I told him. I begged him. And he chose to stay anyway." The confession came in waves. Mel did not cry at first. He was too angry to cry. He told me that everyone wants to call what happened to Rob and Michele a tragedy, some terrible accident, some unpredictable explosion of mental illness that nobody could have prevented. And then Mel leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost like a growl, and said, "That is a lie. This was not unpredictable. This was a slow-motion disaster that we all watched happening for 10 years. And we stayed quiet because Rob asked us to, and our silence murdered him." Mel painted a picture of the inner circle, the people who really knew what was happening inside that Brentwood house. He said that everyone close to Rob and Michele understood that Nick had become something dangerous, something beyond troubled or struggling or going through a difficult phase. Mel used a word that shocked me. He said Nick had become feral. Like an animal that used to be domesticated but has been twisted by pain and resentment into something that operates purely on instinct and rage. 6 months before the murder, Mel told me, Rob showed up at his house unannounced. This was unusual because Rob always called first. They had a routine. But on this particular Sunday afternoon, Rob just appeared at the door. Mel said Rob looked like he had not slept in days. His eyes had dark circles underneath them. His hands would not stop moving, picking at his cuticles, rubbing his face, fidgeting with his watch. Mel made them coffee, and they sat outside on the patio, and Rob began to talk. Nick had come back from what was supposed to be his final rehabilitation attempt. The family had spent $200,000 on a 90-day program at a facility in Arizona that promised intensive therapy and medication management, and all the clinical language that gives desperate parents hope. Nick lasted 17 days before he convinced the staff he was well enough to leave. He came back to the Brentwood house, and within 48 hours, the terror started again. Rob told Mel something that still makes Mel's voice shake when he repeats it. He said, "I am scared in my own home. I wait until I hear him go to sleep before I can relax. And even then I cannot really relax, because I do not know if he is actually asleep or if he is just waiting for me to let my guard down." When Mel heard this, he asked Rob a direct question. He said, "Are you locking your door at night?" And Rob, quiet, ashamed, nodded. He had started locking his bedroom door from the inside. Not to keep Michele safe from Nick, to keep both of them safe from Nick. Rob Reiner, the man who built an entire career on stories about human connection and family bonds and the power of communication, was barricading himself in his own bedroom because he was terrified of his own son. Mel told Rob something harsh that day. He said, "If you are locking yourself in at night, that means you already know he is capable of killing you. You have already made that assessment. You just refuse to act on it." And Rob, sweet Rob, who always wanted to see the best in everyone, looked at Mel with tears in his eyes and said, "But what if I am wrong? What if this is just fear talking? What if he gets better and I threw him out and he dies alone on the street and I could have saved him?" This is where Mel raised his voice, reliving the argument for me. He said he grabbed Rob by both arms, looked him directly in the face and said, "You are not wrong. Your instincts are screaming at you. Listen to them. Get him out of your house today, not tomorrow, today." And Rob pulled away. He said Mel was overreacting. He said Nick was sick, not evil. He said that Mel did not understand because Mel never had children. That comment, Mel told me, almost ended their friendship right there. Because Mel has known Rob since Rob was in diapers. Mel helped raise Rob in some ways. And to have Rob say that Mel could not possibly understand felt like a knife in the chest. But Mel let it go. He apologized, he backed off. And that decision, Mel said with his voice breaking, is something he will regret until the day he dies. The financial situation was worse than anyone knew. Mel revealed that Nick was not just asking his parents for money, he was extorting them. Nick had developed a narrative, twisted and delusional, but internally consistent, that Rob's fame had ruined his life. That being Rob Reiner's son meant Nick could never have his own identity, his own success, his own achievements. Every door that opened for Nick, he believed, only opened because of Rob's name. And every door that closed, he believed, closed because he would always be compared to his father and found lacking.
So Nick decided that Rob owed him, not just support, not just love, but payment, reparations for the psychological damage of being born into a Hollywood dynasty. Nick would send Rob spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets, itemizing the costs of his suffering, therapy sessions he needed because of Rob's shadow, career opportunities he lost because of Rob's reputation, relationships that failed because of Rob's fame. And at the bottom of these spreadsheets would be a number: $2 million, $5 million. Numbers that made no sense, but that Nick insisted were owed to him. And Rob, desperate to keep the peace, desperate to prove his love, desperate to believe that if he just gave Nick enough resources, then Nick would finally heal. Rob paid. Not the full amounts, but enough. Cars, apartments, cash transfers. Mel said Rob spent over $3 million in the last 5 years trying to buy Nick's stability. And all it did was teach Nick that threats work, that rage works, that if you scream loud enough and break enough things and make enough accusations, eventually your father will hand you a check. Mel called it the worst thing you can do to an addict. He said, "You are not helping them. You are funding their destruction. And you are teaching them that love means giving in." The holidays last year were the final warning sign that Mel wishes he had acted on. There was a small gathering at Rob's house. Just close friends. Mel was there, and Nick was there, moving through the rooms like a ghost, not really participating in conversations, just watching. Mel said it was the watching that terrified him. Nick would stare at Rob with an expression that Mel had never seen on a son's face before. It was not love. It was not even anger. It was calculation, cold, assessing. Like Nick was studying Rob, figuring out weaknesses, planning something. During dinner, Rob made a joke. Mel cannot even remember what the joke was about. Something self-deprecating, the way Rob always made jokes to lighten the mood. Everyone laughed, except Nick. Nick just continued staring at his father with that same cold expression. And then Nick stood up, walked out of the room without saying a word, and drove away. Later that evening, after all the guests had left, Mel called Rob. He said, "You need to understand what I saw tonight. I saw a predator, not a sick child, not a struggling addict, a predator." And Rob got defensive again. He said Mel was being dramatic. He said Nick was just having a bad day. He said Mel did not see Nick the way Michele saw Nick, with compassion and understanding. And Mel, exhausted from years of this argument, said, "Fine. If you want to die in that house, that is your choice. But do not ask me to pretend I did not warn you." Those were the last words Mel spoke to Rob in person. The next time they communicated was the phone call on December 13th, 90 minutes before Rob was murdered. Mel was in bed, reading. It was late, nearly midnight. His phone rang. He almost sent it to voicemail because he was tired and he assumed it was a spam call. But something made him look at the screen. It was Rob. And when Mel answered, Rob's voice was trembling. He said, "Mel, I need to tell you something in case anything happens to me." Mel sat up immediately. He said, "Where are you right now? What is going on?" Rob explained that Nick had come home from Conan O'Brien's Christmas party in a rage. There had been some kind of argument at the party. Nick believed that Rob had embarrassed him in front of important people. Nick had come home screaming, destroying things, making threats. Michele was trying to calm him down. But Nick was not calming down. He was escalating. He was saying things like, "You ruined my entire life, and you are going to pay for it. And I should have been the one with the career and the fame, and you stole it from me." Mel told Rob to get in the car immediately. "Leave the house. Drive to Mel's house. Bring Michele. Leave Nick there, alone. To destroy whatever he wants to destroy. But get yourselves out." And this is when Rob said the sentence that Mel will hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Rob said, "I cannot leave her down there with him alone. She is trying to protect me. If I run, he will hurt her instead. I have to go back downstairs. I just wanted to call you first in case something goes wrong." Mel was screaming into the phone at this point, screaming at Rob to stop being a martyr, to stop believing he could fix this, to get Michele and get out of the house right now. But Rob was not listening anymore. He was already making his decision. He said, "I love you, Mel. Thank you for everything." And then he hung up. Mel tried calling back 17 times. No answer. He thought about calling 911. He thought about driving to the house himself. But he convinced himself that Rob was overreacting, that nothing would actually happen, that by morning, this would just be another scary moment that passed. By morning, Rob and Michele were dead. Mel told me that the guilt is worse than any grief he has ever experienced. Worse than losing his wife. Worse than losing Carl. Because those deaths were inevitable. But this death was preventable. And Mel had the power to prevent it. One phone call to 911 on December 13th would have saved 2 lives. But Mel respected Rob's autonomy. He respected Rob's privacy. And that respect became complicity. Toward the end of our conversation, Mel stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the California sun, too bright for the weight of what we had been discussing. He said, "I am the last one left now. Everyone I loved from that generation is gone. And I am standing here knowing that the little boy I used to make laugh, the boy who called me Uncle Mel, died because I was too polite to call the police." He turned back to me, his face hard with resolve. He said, "I am going to spend whatever time I have left making sure this does not happen to another family. I am going to tell the truth about what unconditional love looks like when it has no boundaries. Because Rob loved Nick unconditionally, and that unconditional love killed him."
Part 2. Billy Crystal describes the moment he realized his best friend was gone. When you watch Billy Crystal, you are watching someone who has spent 50 years perfecting the art of making people comfortable. He knows exactly when to deliver a punchline, exactly when to shift from comedy to sincerity, exactly how to make a room of strangers feel like family. But when Billy opened his door on December 26th, there was nothing comfortable about him. He looked hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and removed something essential. His eyes were red, his voice was rough. And when he started talking about December 14th, about the phone call from Romy, about arriving at that house and seeing what he saw, he did not sound like Billy Crystal the performer. He sounded like a man who had witnessed something that broke him. Billy and Rob were not just friends. They were brothers in every way that matters. They met in 1975 when Billy was a young comedian trying to break into television, and Rob was already famous as Meathead on All in the Family. They connected immediately, two Jewish kids from similar backgrounds who understood each other's rhythms and references and anxieties. Over 50 years, they became inseparable. Their families vacationed together. Their children grew up together. Billy was at the hospital when Rob's kids were born. Rob spoke at Billy's mother's funeral. So when Billy's phone rang at 3:45 p.m. on December 14th and he saw Romy's name, he assumed it was something normal. Maybe she was calling to confirm plans for an upcoming dinner. Maybe she needed advice about something. He answered with his usual warmth, ready to help with whatever small problem had come up. Instead, he heard a scream that he said sounded like it came from the depths of hell itself. Billy tried to make out words through the screaming. He heard "Dad" and "blood" and "dead" and "please," and that was enough. He did not ask questions. He did not try to calm Romy down. He just dropped his phone, grabbed his keys, and ran to his car. He does not remember the drive. He does not remember what streets he took or what lights he ran or how fast he was going. He just remembers the single thought pounding in his head over and over. Get to Romy. Get to Rob. Get there now. When Billy arrived at the Brentwood house, the scene was already chaos. Police cars, ambulances, neighbors gathering on the sidewalk with their phones out, yellow tape going up. And in the middle of all of it, sitting on the front lawn being held by a paramedic, was Romy. 28 years old, covered in her father's blood, shaking so violently that the paramedic had to hold her upright. Billy ran to her. Romy saw him, and the scream came again, this raw animal sound of pure anguish. She grabbed onto Billy like he was the only solid thing left in the universe, and she sobbed into his chest, her entire body convulsing with grief. And through the sobs, through the gasping for air, she told Billy what she had found upstairs. The massage therapist had called Romy when Rob and Michele did not answer the gate. Romy drove over with her boyfriend, thinking maybe her parents had fallen asleep or forgotten about the appointment. She let herself in with her key. The house was silent in a way that felt wrong immediately. Too still, too heavy. She called out for her parents. No response. She walked upstairs, each step filling her with more dread. The bedroom door was closed. She opened it. Her father was on the floor. His throat had been cut so deeply that Romy could see bone. Blood had soaked into the carpet around him. Michele was on the bed, multiple stab wounds, her throat also cut, both of them with their eyes open, staring at nothing. Romy told Billy that her brain could not process what she was seeing at first. She knelt down next to her father and touched his face, expecting him to be warm, expecting him to wake up, expecting this to be some kind of horrible nightmare. But his skin was cold. And that was when reality crashed into her and she started screaming. What haunts Billy is what Romy told him next. She said that when she knelt down, she saw her father's hand. It was reaching toward the bedroom door, fingers extended, like he had been trying to crawl toward it, like his final act had been attempting to escape. And near the door on the inside there were marks, scratches in the wood, from fingernails. Rob had tried to claw the door open. He had been trapped in that room, locked in there with Nick, and he had tried desperately to get out. Billy said that detail destroyed him more than anything else, because it meant Rob knew. In those final moments, Rob knew exactly what was happening. He knew Nick was going to kill him. He tried to run, and he could not. While Billy was holding Romy on the lawn, his phone rang. It was Larry David, who lived nearby and had heard sirens. Billy told him what happened. Larry said he was coming immediately, and within minutes, Larry was there, standing next to Billy, both of them watching as the coroner's van pulled up and the bodies were carried out in black bags. Billy and Larry did not speak. There was nothing to say. They just stood there as the physical evidence of their friend's murder was loaded into a van and driven away. And Billy said that in that moment, standing on that perfect, manicured lawn in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Los Angeles, he understood something visceral about how fragile everything is. Rob had every advantage: money, fame, resources, access to the best therapists and doctors and facilities, and none of it mattered. Because Rob had one fatal flaw: he could not say no to his son. What Billy carries now, what wakes him up at night in a cold sweat, is the memory of 3 weeks before the murder. Rob had called him late, around midnight. Rob's voice sounded exhausted, defeated. He told Billy that Nick had made a threat. Nick had said, "If you cut me off, I am not going to just kill myself. I am going to take you and Mom with me." Billy remembers exactly what he said in response. He said, "Rob, he is just trying to scare you. He is not actually going to do it. Do not let him manipulate you like this." Billy told Rob it was an empty threat. He told Rob to ignore it. He told Rob that Nick was just pushing buttons to get money. And now, Billy has to live with the knowledge that he dismissed the exact threat that came true. He minimized it. He told his best friend not to worry about the thing that killed him. Billy is planning to speak at Rob's memorial service in January, and he told me exactly what he is going to say. He is going to tell the truth. He is going to say that Rob Reiner died because everyone around him, including Billy himself, enabled his denial. They let Rob believe that love alone would be enough. They let Rob convince them that setting boundaries would be cruel. They stayed quiet when they should have been loud. And their silence was a weapon that Nick used to murder his parents. At the end of our interview, Billy walked me to the door. He stopped, hand on the doorknob, and said something I will never forget. He said, "For 50 years, Rob was the person I called when things went wrong. When my mom died, when I bombed on stage, when I needed advice. He was my person. And now, when I pick up the phone to call him and tell him about this nightmare I am living through, I remember. He is the nightmare. He is the reason I am broken, and there is nobody to call." Part 3. Michael Douglas reveals he told Rob exactly how to save his own life, and Rob refused. When you sit down with Michael Douglas, you are sitting down with someone who has lived multiple lifetimes. He has been Hollywood royalty from birth. He has survived throat cancer. He has had a son go to prison for drug dealing. He has seen the absolute best and worst that fame and wealth can create. And on December 26th, when Michael began talking about Rob Reiner, he spoke with the authority of someone who had lived through a version of Rob's nightmare and survived it by making the hardest choice a parent can make. He walked away from his son to save his son, and he tried desperately to convince Rob to do the same. And Rob refused. And now Rob is dead. Michael and Rob talked constantly in the final year of Rob's life, sometimes twice a week, long phone calls about their sons, about addiction, about the crushing weight of being born into Hollywood legacy. Michael's son Cameron had battled heroin addiction for years, had dealt methamphetamine, had gone to prison for 7 years. Michael had watched his son nearly die multiple times, and Michael had made a decision that went against every parental instinct he had. He cut Cameron off completely, no visits, no money, no help. For 2 years, Michael let Cameron suffer the full consequences of his choices. And it worked. Cameron got sober. Cameron rebuilt his life. Cameron is now a father himself and calls Michael every week to thank him for having the strength to let him hit bottom. Michael tried to teach Rob this lesson. Over and over, in phone call after phone call, Michael explained that the worst thing you can do for an addict is rescue them from their own consequences. That every time you bail them out, you are teaching them that their behavior works. That love without boundaries is not love at all. It is enabling, and enabling kills. But Rob would not listen, because Michele could not bear the thought of Nick suffering, and Rob could not bear the thought of disappointing Michele. So the enabling continued, and the danger escalated. Michael revealed something that shocked me. In September, 3 months before the murders, Michael called Rob after hearing him on a podcast saying Nick was doing great
and had been clean for 6 years. Michael knew this was a lie. He had heard from mutual friends that Nick was actively using, that he was living at the Brentwood house, that he was making threats. So Michael called Rob immediately and said something direct and brutal. He said, "Rob, if you do not get Nick out of your house right now, he is going to kill you. Not maybe, not possibly. He is going to kill you."
Rob got angry. He said Michael was being paranoid and cruel. He said Nick was struggling but was not dangerous. He said Michael did not understand Nick's situation. And Michael responded with something that he now replays in his head every night. He said, "I understand it perfectly. Cameron was dangerous too. And if I had let him keep living with me, if I had kept enabling him, he might have killed me too. The only difference between Cameron and Nick is that I set a boundary, and you will not." Rob hung up on him. They did not speak again until after the murders, when Michael called to offer his condolences to Jake and Romy. On December 13th, the night before the murders, Rob and Michele went to Conan O'Brien's Christmas party. Nick went with them. Multiple people at the party told police that Nick had some kind of outburst, that he got into an argument with Rob, that the atmosphere around them was tense and uncomfortable. Rob and Michele left early. Nick left separately. And at 4 a.m., Nick checked into a hotel in Santa Monica. Hotel staff later found blood in the shower, blood on the mattress. Nick had murdered his parents sometime between midnight and 3 a.m., then calmly driven to a hotel, taken a shower, and gone to sleep. Michael said this detail proves everything he had been trying to tell Rob. This was not a psychotic break. This was not a moment of uncontrolled rage. Nick had planned this. He had thought about it. He had executed it. He had cleaned up afterward. This was a calculated murder by someone who had decided his parents deserved to die. Michael believes the system failed Rob and Michele as much as their own choices did. He said, "There were therapists and doctors who minimized the danger, who told Rob and Michele that tough love was outdated, who encouraged them to practice radical acceptance instead of setting firm boundaries." Michael called these people accomplices to murder. He said they took Rob's money and told him what he wanted to hear instead of what he needed to hear. But ultimately, Michael said, the responsibility lies with Rob. Because Michael told him, Mel told him, Billy told him, everyone who loved Rob told him that Nick was going to kill him if he did not get Nick out of that house. And Rob chose to stay. He chose to believe that love would be enough. And it was not. Michael's voice got quiet when he talked about what happens next. He said, "Cameron calls him every week now. Cameron thanks Michael for saving his life by refusing to enable him. Cameron is grateful that Michael loved him enough to let him suffer. And every time Cameron says this, Michael thinks about Rob, about how Rob loved Nick too much to let him suffer, and how that love killed him." At the end of our interview, Michael said something that summarized everything. He said, "The hardest thing I ever did was walk away from Cameron when he was at his worst. It felt like I was abandoning him. It felt like I was violating every promise I made as a father. But I knew that if I stayed, if I kept enabling, I would not be saving him. I would be killing him. Rob could not make that choice. And now he is dead. And I have to live knowing I could have saved him if he had just listened." On December 27th, Mel Brooks, Billy Crystal, and Michael Douglas released a statement together. It was short. It was devastating. And it said everything that needed to be said. "We loved Rob Reiner. We loved Michele. But we failed them. We saw the danger. We warned them. And we let them convince us to stay silent. We respected their privacy when we should have called the police. We enabled their denial when we should have forced an intervention. And now they are dead. We are speaking now because we want every family in America to understand that unconditional love is not the same as unconditional enabling. Love means setting boundaries. Love means saying no. Love means protecting yourself even when it breaks your heart. Rob Reiner loved his son to death. Literally. Do not make the same mistake. If someone you love is dangerous, get help. Call the police. Get a restraining order. Do whatever it takes. Because silence kills. We failed Rob. Do not fail your own family. Signed, Mel Brooks, Billy Crystal, Michael Douglas.